ready? Good morning, and welcome to the good evening. Excuse me. Good evening. Welcome to the October 19th, 2011 Traffic and Transportation Advisory Commission meeting for the City of Thousand Oaks. Will you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. We ready to call the roll?
Chair McMinn.
Here.
Vice Chair Lemo.
Here.
Commissioner Engler.
Here.
Commissioner McKay.
Here.
Commissioner Gregory is absent. Thank you.
Any person who wishes to speak regarding an item on the agenda or on a subject within the city's jurisdiction during the public comments portion of the agenda must file a public speaker card with the recording secretary before that portion of the agenda is called. Any person who wishes to speak on a specific agenda item must file a public speaker card before that specific item is called. Persons addressing the Traffic Commission are requested to state their name and city of residence for the record. Under state law, issues presented or introduced under public comments can have no action and will be referred to the Traffic Engineering Division Manager for administrative action or scheduled on the subsequent agenda. Item number 4 is public comments. We have no public in-house, at least. The summary notes of our last meeting, are there any questions or comments on those? Okay. Then we can move on to the engineer's reports. Item 6A, the future of transportation in Ventura County. Executive Director Darren Kettle from the Ventura County Transportation Commission.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's a pleasure to be here this evening. Again, I'm Darren Kettle. I'm the Executive Director with the Ventura County Transportation Commission, and I'm going to do what I can to go through a presentation that's talking about some of the activity that the Ventura County Transportation Commission is undertaking to look towards our transportation future. And just by way of a little bit of background, the Transportation Commission is a 17-member board that has 15 local elected officials, 1 city council member from every city. Council member Dennis Gillette represents the city of Thousand Oaks on the commission, as well as all 5 members of the County Board of Supervisors and 2 citizens appointees. So it is very much a regional agency that is wrestling with regional challenges that Ventura County has to address. And of course, our focus is transportation. One of the things we have not done as an agency is a lot of long-term comprehensive transportation planning. We have now undertaken this effort that we call Go Ventura 2035 to try to get a handle on just what our transportation future looks like. That can be almost characterized the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's some real positives in what our transportation plan brings out for our future, but they're like anything in with public agencies, we have our challenges as well. So what I'm going to just real briefly do is talk a little bit about some of the work we've been doing for the last couple of years as it relates to the planning and outreach effort. Also a discussion of an overall transportation plan framework and some program of projects and programs that we're looking at, keeping in mind that transportation goes beyond just the city street, but onto our freeway system, our transit system, bicycle and pedestrian, and a number of other elements. As you might expect, as you start doing a planning exercise, oftentimes the costs can add up, so we'll be talking a little bit about our transportation funding program, and then what we'll be doing longer term as it relates to some about what our next steps will be. I've been out throughout the county for the I've been with the Ventura County Transportation Commission for 4 years now, and really the last 2 years we've worked very, very hard on this planning effort. But a part of any planning effort is sort of having an idea where you are right now. If you don't have an idea where you are right now, you certainly aren't going to have a good idea of where you're going to be going in the future. So a few things that we know that we're experiencing throughout Ventura County at this point, and I think in the city of Thousand Oaks, to some degree or another, you're going to, you may feel or see some of these things as residents of this city. As a county, we have continued to grow. We are one of the slower growing counties in Southern California, but we have had steady growth for the last, really for about the last 30 years at about 1 to 1.2% growth. So we see that now, and we expect that to happen, to continue to occur, even in these somewhat recessionary times, and I'll touch on that here shortly. Commute times, particularly on our major freeway corridors, are continuing to grow. Even though we've had unprecedented, darn near unprecedented unemployment, the 101 corridor has either had steady congestion or worsening congestion throughout that corridor, what I characterize as being Main Street Ventura County. If Ventura County has a Main Street, it is the 101 corridor. And we have seen that commute times, particularly during peak hours, continuing to grow. We have seen deteriorating road conditions. Some cities in the county have greater struggles than this, with this than others. But no matter where we are in the county, we have heard about concerns about deteriorating road conditions. And what's even more frightening is the fact that local governments are seeing reduction in resources to take care of city streets and roads, and then also an underutilized and disconnected transit system. And I'll touch on a little bit about our transit systems in this county as well over the course of the presentation. So just real briefly, that's a little bit about what we're seeing right now. Again, I've mentioned what we've been doing for the last couple years. I mentioned to John earlier that I have been throughout this county doing some version of this road show throughout the county to chambers of commerce, various service clubs, local government agencies, committees similar to yours, and then just community groups that bicycling community, the representatives from social service and human services groups, the university campuses, the community college campuses. So we have been out doing an extensive amount of outreach. We have a number of local advisory groups that are made up of community leaders throughout the county. I will show you a little bit about some of the feedback we had from those. We have a regional advisory group that is another level that's taken a lot of the information we've had from the local advisory groups and said, this is what we're seeing at the local level. What's your sense from a regional perspective? We've had Naval Base Ventura County involved in that program, Visita, some of our larger employers throughout the county. We've had the Nature Conservancy. We've had a number of Chamber of Commerce groups that have been playing a role in our community with our community presentations and regional advisory groups. We do have a web and media effort that's underway. We have our own website for the plan. We've been doing a substantial amount of press and media outreach. You may have seen in the Star a number of op-ed pieces that written by me talking about the challenges that we are wrestling with in the county, particularly looking at further down the road, recognizing the nature of the planning effort. And then we've been doing surveys of our residents, of our businesses, asking about what are they experiencing, and what we have heard about the nature of how congestion is affecting employees getting to work, how transit has not worked for particularly employees that may be at the lower income levels and trying to provide transportation for those types of programs. So we've had a fairly broad range of response to our surveys. This, of course.
Can we get a copy of this PowerPoint so that we're not madly over here taking notes instead of listening
absolutely.
and watching? Okay,
my pleasure. My pleasure. We'll make sure we get that to John tomorrow so we can get it circulated. This slide will talk a little bit about the outreach we've done in each of the somewhat defined local areas throughout Ventura County, from Ojai Valley in the local advisory group there, and you can see down in the bottom right-hand corner some of the feedback that we received from the local advisory group that came out of the Conejo Valley. And see, these are a few of the issues that we heard from the participants in that meeting that ranged from business community, Cal Lutheran, some of the special interest groups that are like bicyclists that have a very loud voice, but really are not all that demanding. All they need is a little bit more asphalt and a little bit more paint. So it's everybody has been very, very reasonable in what they've suggested is important from a transportation perspective. But some of the things that there's concern about local congestion, both on local surface streets, but of course the nature of the congestion on the 101 freeway then spills over into local surface streets in the Conejo Valley. So between the congestion on the 101, the impacts of the 23-101 interchange being deficient has caused more localized congestion. Concern about transit for schools, that the transit system doesn't may be able to help serve the school population. Recognizing the local character, and this just better public awareness of the transportation options that are out there, and that's going to be particularly relevant for a segment of the population in Thousand Oaks that right now we may not have necessarily recognized, but we see as planners and as we try to figure out, okay, how are we going to fix this for the long term, a population that we really need to be careful and be aware of, and I'll touch on that here in a second. A little bit about countywide themes. We heard a lot about connections between communities. Now, there is a wonderful element of Ventura County, the communities that we have. Each of our cities have a very distinct, recognized a feeling about them, but there continues to grow to be a need to connect between cities, whether it's between Moore Park and Thousand Oaks and Camarillo, and then as we move into Simi Valley and up into Ventura, we have heard a lot about connecting between communities. That while we do enjoy the space that is between communities, we are more and more finding ourselves connecting with our neighbors. We heard quite a bit about concerns as it relates to transit throughout the county. We have, in some places, we have major capacity issues. Not as much a problem in the Conejo Valley, but very much concerns in the western portion of the county. We operate the VCTC operates the Vista transit system, that is the intercity connection transit system for Ventura County. Goes into Warner Center in LA County, extends up into Santa Barbara. But we also run throughout the 126 corridor out through Santa Paula Fillmore. We are literally at standing room only on those buses during the peak travel time, and have had to leave people at bus stops because we simply do not have a capacity on those large over-the-road coaches to handle the people that need to use transit in some of our communities. We have some frequency questions and the amount of service. As we were in the Conejo Valley, there is a recognition that TO Transit doesn't operate on Saturdays and Sundays, and fixed route buses that don't operate on Saturdays and Sundays, and hours either early or later in the afternoon, in the evening. We also had heard again about connections between parts of the county as well. Safety issues, that's pretty standard no matter where we are, whether it's highways, roadways, bicycle and pedestrian. That's been a common concern. Local roads is probably where everybody feels the transportation system, first and foremost. I'm sure that this body gets to hear on regular occasion the concerns about residents from the city of Thousand Oaks that are concerned about the nature of local road maintenance, making sure that streets can accommodate pedestrians and bicyclists. It's not all about the car, and making sure that there's revenues to pay for striping for bicyclists, better repairing sidewalks, those types of things. We call it complete streets, but that's the generic term for saying, hey, it's more than just taking care of the 2 inches of pavement or so that is on our streets and roads. Planning for growth is a big question. I mentioned the fact that we've generally been a pretty slow-growing county relative to much of Southern California. It may surprise you to know there's recent U.S. Census Bureau statistics that have just come out. Probably not a surprise that San Bernardino and Riverside counties have grew faster than Ventura County in the decade of 2000 to 2010. But percentage-wise, it might surprise you to know that Ventura County grew faster than Los Angeles County in that decade. We grew faster than Orange County in that decade. And we grew almost as fast as San Diego County in that decade. So not because we have a huge amount of in-migration necessarily, where people are coming from outside the county and moving in, but because our population is living longer. For those of you that are baby boomers, that's you. And people are still having babies. So we are expecting our growth to continue at 1 to 1.5% over the course of the next 30 years. And where we see the greatest amount of that growth is in our senior population. At some point, our population, probably the seniors won't be the ones that do this, but the kids of the seniors are going to be saying, Mom and Dad, you need to give up the keys to the car. And that's something that we are dealing with. The baby boomers have been the most mobile generation that we have ever seen. They enjoy that independence. We believe that we better start planning now to make sure that those baby boomers, as they become seniors, they're going to be pretty cranky if they're not able to enjoy that mobility that they've enjoyed up to now. We coined a term, if we're not careful, we're going to end up with a bunch of latchkey seniors. And that is not a place that I think that this generation, the baby boomer generation, is going to accept. And of course, we need to make sure that we need to look at a strategic needs-based planning and funding. So as we start talking about some of the funding questions, this pie chart shows the revenues that we think we serve as the agency that takes state and federal revenues, transportation revenues, and get them out into transportation projects and programs. This pie chart shows the revenue stream of about $4.5 billion over the next 30 years that will go to our transportation system. And for a variety of different reasons, this is pretty much the way the money has to flow. In our world, we use the term color of money. And oftentimes your color of money can only be used for certain things. As an example, we see nearly 50% of our revenues that we're pretty certain are going to show up has to go to public transit. We couldn't shift it to local roads. That's important because I'm going to show you a couple of slides that show we have some fairly substantial gaps in taking care of our local roads, maybe not as big a gaps in taking care of our public transit. Speaking of local streets and roads, over the next 30 years, we actually worked with the city engineers of all 10 cities in the county, as well as the county public works department, to identify what our long-term need is, just to take care of streets and roads in the condition that they're in now. The total need for the next 30 years is about $2.2 billion countywide. We have about $1.1 billion in revenues that are identified that we generally believe we should be able to count on. And that's tough because we're talking about the state and federal government making sure that that money is going to continue to flow. And right now it's one of those things where you have to be careful what kind of assumptions you make on the state and feds making sure that that funding does continue to flow. But right now, just to maintain streets and roads, we have a $2.2 billion need. We have about $1.1 billion in available funding. So this is the slide that I mentioned generally starts sending city engineers into early retirement. They're very concerned about how do they take care of streets and roads to the condition and to the level of congestion that currently exists out there. And it's a big question. John and I touched on that earlier before the meeting started about, well, where do we start to compromise on our road maintenance or our congestion levels? Those are choices we'll have to make. If we had a supplemental revenue source, obviously it takes care of our streets and roads. It may allow us in certain cities that already have roads in fairly decent shape to be able to maybe go beyond that and look at adding functionality like better bike lanes, more pedestrian elements, and those types of things. On the arterial side, much of that is included in our local streets. You, as members of the Traffic and Transportation Commission, are going to be familiar with the difference between an arterial and a local street and road. But in the case of Thousand Oaks Boulevard, as an example, the maintenance of that road was covered in the local streets and roads section. As we've been doing all of our work in our outreach in Ventura County, arterials, other than maintaining them, have not been a big issue. They've not been something that's drawn out a huge amount of concern long term. We will likely end up, though, with congestion issues on some of our larger arterials, or what could be larger arterials in Ventura County. Those are the county roads that connect between communities. And if we're not using the freeway, we're using those roads, and we may end up with some issues there. But if with a supplemental revenue program, we generally end up addressing some of those congestion issues that come out of, as an example, top 10 major intersections throughout the county that just don't function. If we need to repair or improve intersections, if we need to add some capacity to some of the existing larger arterials. And then, of course, importantly, is operational safety and connectivity between communities. Transit, the big question with transit is a lot depends on the level of service that is going to be important to Ventura County. Are we satisfied with the level of service that we have out there right now, or should we have a standard that says we should really have fixed route bus service operating 7 days a week for the people that need to use that service? Particularly, this goes back to that population I was mentioning, that seniors and students are becoming more and more transit dependent, and our system is not set up for that in many places in Ventura County. The good news is that we have nearly $2.25 billion to fund transit in this county, but we've got some questions about how do we structure that. I've mentioned earlier we have 7 different fixed route bus systems in Ventura County. Does that make sense long term? Do we find some operational efficiencies by looking at consolidating some of those systems and having a 1 or 2 or some lesser number to better deliver service, find efficiencies, reduce some of the administration and bureaucracy? We do look to need to sustain at minimum the current levels of bus and Metrolink service, but with additional revenues and probably some efficiencies, we can get a whole lot more blood out of that turnip. There are, again, some of the big questions will come back to how do we get some efficiencies out of the systems that we have out there now, and that's a real challenge for Ventura County because, again, I mentioned the multiple fixed route bus systems as well as the multiple dial ride services, and it's hard for people to understand how to use those. And transit is not a huge element of how we get around in Ventura County, but it is very deficient as far as a suburban system goes. We only have about 1.2% of our work trips use transit, whereas most suburban counties are anywhere from 2 to 2.5%. We have some challenges because, again, we of our commute trips use transit. So it is difficult to serve with transit in Ventura County because we do have spaces between communities, but we've been hearing quite a bit about connectivity again too. So I had a chance to do a presentation at Cal State Channel Islands. There was a young man from Newberry Park that mentioned that for him to get from Newberry Park to the campus, it could take about 1 hour and 45 to 2 hours if he wanted to take transit, because he has to go. He has to catch a TO bus back to the mall, to catch a Vista bus, to get down to the Camarillo station, and so on and so forth. So we have some places where our system breaks down for those that are interested in being able to use it. So that's something that we need to work through. Highways and freeways, this is another big area where we have some long-term challenges. Throughout Ventura County, if we were looking at our if US 101 is Main Street, Ventura County, I'll call State Route 118, the stretch between Moore Park and Simi Valley, is First Street. Okay, so we have Main and First. Those are our two primary backbone corridors. The total need, and we're seeing congestion on both, total need to take care of those improvements is about $1.2 billion over the next 30 years. If we wanted to add one lane in each direction on the 101 corridor and one lane in each direction on the 118, it's about $1.2 billion. Under the revenue streams that we believe are going to show up, we have about $657 million. So we're about halfway there. And that does beg a question then, are we going to be satisfied with the nature of congestion that we have right now? Is it and likely going to grow? I'm an eternal optimist. So as we pull out of the recession, people get back to work. We see congestion on the 101 growing at fairly substantial levels. The Conejo Valley right now has some of the greatest congestion that we have in Ventura County. There's competition between the Conejo crawl and the Camarillo crawl, and particularly during peak commute times. But that revenue stream, those revenue streams come in over 30 years, so we would look at those types of improvements over a very, very long period of time. So the timing of those improvements are suspect at best. Last week, real quickly, I'll touch on this. Last week, Councilmember Jackie Irwin and I were in Washington, D.C., along with several members of the Thousand Oaks city staff, talking about the 101-23 interchange project, and that we were back advocating for $20 million of federal funds to try to accelerate fixing one major linchpin project. That's the 101-23 interchange. And what we were told is that we have that for that same funding source, there's about $530 million available nationwide. They received 1,100 applications totaling $7 billion for that one revenue stream, for that one funding source. So our chances aren't great, but our chances certainly were worse if we didn't apply. So certainly we needed to do that. But we really do have long-term challenges with the 101 and 118 corridor as far as getting that built. So we're about halfway there with the funding there. If we had supplemental revenues, we certainly could look at the 101 corridor and advancing what would likely end up needing to be a carpool lane from the L.A. County line to State Route 33, the route that goes up to Ojai. Improvements on the 118 as well as improvements on the 126. We do have some fairly substantial safety issues and operational issues on the 126, particularly out between Santa Paula, Fillmore, and Piru. Bicycle and pedestrian. I mentioned the fact that we've had a lot of feedback from the bicycle, particularly the bicycle community. There's a concern, and while their concerns are such that it might interest you, I mentioned that the bicycle community is not a demanding group of advocates. What they ask for is just pave up to the curb and make sure you can stripe. You can paint a stripe so that we have some place to ride our bike. There is nobody that knows more about our road conditions than a bicyclist, because they've got 1-inch tires and not the comfort of really nice suspension that cars have. But what we found generally in the county, we have about $230 million over 30 years. In this county, we probably need double that to take care of the bicycle paths and bike trails that we have throughout the county, mainly, again, to make sure that local jurisdictions are paving all the way to the curb. They're striping out bike lanes. But the other area that we heard quite a bit about was connectivity between communities. And we have, many of our cities have some fairly decent bike networks. Most of our cities have fairly good bike networks. Where we break down is going between communities, generally through county unincorporated area. And we are seeing bicycling both from a recreational perspective, but then just actually as a commute vehicle. So a long-term connectivity of our bike system is something that we need to look at, and it likely means doubling that revenue. Environmental and mitigation programs, typically in transportation, this is left off the table as not being an issue to be concerned with, but in Ventura County, that's clearly not the case. Transportation is more than just a way to get around. It does have a recreational component. We see a trail system that, as you start talking with any local agency or a Parks and Rec agency, the concern about maintaining trails for recreational purposes is really becoming challenged. Maintaining open space, restoring open space, acquiring open space becomes a key element in mitigating for transportation improvements. The next bullet, urban runoff. This is another area that local governments are very concerned. As a beach county, you will not find any more hot topic of an issue about beach pollution than taking care of urban runoff, and the greatest source of urban runoff is from our city streets. And so we do need to recognize that we're going to have to start planning for treating that runoff long term to maintain the nature of clean beaches. The last bullet deals with land use and mobility incentives. Some of the things that have changed in the last couple of years are some state laws that are shifting a discussion to look at some changes, encouraging some local governments to look at some different land use discussions, looking at mixed-use development, transit-oriented development. It's not going to be something that we're going to see sprout up all over Ventura County, but there are places throughout Ventura County that may make sense for this, and a supplemental revenue stream can help support some of those types of developments. One example is we have the Camarillo train station where we have Metrolink, Pacific Surfliner, Amtrak service, a number of our Vista buses, and a college campus that has a number of students that park there adjacent to Old Town Camarillo. It likely makes sense to grow that for purposes of transit-oriented development because you have so much transit supporting it. But there may need to be parking structures that come along with that so that you have adequate parking. Those types of things to encourage local agencies to maybe make some land use decisions that aren't immediately something they would necessarily do because of the challenges that come with looking at the possibility of higher densities, and that comes with a policy question of do we want to go to beyond 3 stories in a community? Well, if you have for transit-oriented development and mixed use. It's likely something that is the only way a project can pencil out for developers to look at those types of things. So it's a question that, from the Transportation Commission's perspective, at least needs to be a possible source of revenue to encourage more use of transit. Freight movement, while it's not as big an issue in Ventura County as it is in some of the other parts of Southern California, it still is an issue in Ventura County. We have this one deepwater port between Los Angeles, Long Beach, and San Francisco with the Port of Hueneme. The Oxnard Harbor District is a major freight movement engine with a large number of automobiles and agricultural products that go in and out of the Port of Hueneme. So we are a part of the regional freight movement network. We have a number of the portions of our freight movement network taken care of, but we have a number of projects that haven't been. We probably have in excess of $60 to $70 million worth of infrastructure improvements to make sure that the freight that is coming through the Port of Hueneme is able to get through Ventura County and to other parts of Southern California, the state, and the rest of the nation. Again, not as big an issue as what you might hear out of Long Beach or Los Angeles, Orange or San Bernardino or Riverside counties, but still we have our concerns there. Transportation system management and transportation demand management are areas that systems management goes to signal timing issues and how do we get better efficiency out of our existing system. And then transportation demand management is improving our carpooling program as an example, or modified work schedules, those types of things to generally get people out of commuting during the peak period to try to stretch out where we have congestion so that it's not as significant. I threw some big numbers out there, and so you can imagine that, okay, well, we've painted somewhat of a bleak picture, and we do have, particularly on some of our major infrastructure, the streets and roads, and our freeway program, we have some fairly substantial questions out there. The total gap in funding countywide is approaching about $3 billion, $2.5 to $3 billion over the next 30 years to take care of our local roads, our highway program, expanding Metrolink services, and our bus services, as well as dealing with bicycle and pedestrian programs, the whole program. So we started looking at the funding options that are available to Ventura County. If the decision is that we want to take care of our roads, we don't want to be stuck in congestion, and we want to have improved transit services. One possibility that's out there is the idea of establishing a county gas tax at 10 cents a gallon. That becomes a real tough question in that with right now our gas taxes have been flat. They're a per gallon fee. So when you start having greater efficiency of vehicles, it becomes an immediately declining revenue stream. That is where we are right now at the state and federal level with our federal and state gas taxes, is that they simply do not pay for the improvements that we need on our freeways and our roads and in our transit system. Tolling is another possibility, but it's likely the only corridor that really makes any sense from a transportation perspective would be the 101 corridor. And then if you do that, the funding is limited to the 101 corridor. Some of the largest funding gaps we have are on our local city streets, and this wouldn't touch our local city streets one bit. There is a relatively new program that's been able to, in state law, that would allow a county to place before the voters a $10 per vehicle registration fee. Generates about $8 million in Ventura County, but that's over 30 years only generates about $240 million. So you'll remember that gap of $1.1 billion for local streets and roads. We don't cover even half the nut to address that issue. So we got past that, and then we got to a program that all other Southern California counties do have in place right now. To fund transportation improvements. Our neighboring county to the south, Los Angeles County, in fact, has a 1.5 cent sales tax for transportation. Santa Barbara has a 0.5 cent sales tax for transportation. So we rolled out a discussion about, well, maybe we need to, at some point, seriously look at a 0.5 cent sales tax measure for transportation improvements in Ventura County that is, again, predominantly dedicated to local streets and roads programs and the major highway network. Our transit system, for a variety of different reasons, seems to be fairly well taken care of, as I'd mentioned, and where we have our big gaps are in those other programs. It does provide for a local revenue stream. It can't be captured by the federal or state governments, so it's raised here, it's spent here. It's all determined. The investments are determined locally. It can facilitate earlier delivery of projects, so we're not having to wait 25 or 30 years to look at some of those major freeway improvements that, if we wanted to widen the 101, it could take a significant period of time to improve and provide some congestion relief there. The tough part, of course, is that as a special tax under the California Constitution, it requires a 2/3 vote countywide, and that's a pretty steep hurdle to get over. It would generate in our county about $2.1 billion over 30 years. That's a number that's been generated by Cal Lutheran's economic forecasting program. They put together a local revenue model for us that showed that we would raise about $2.1 billion over 30 years. So that would be one way that we could fund it. This would be, as we've started putting the numbers together, this would be the revenue distribution for that program. You can see that it does substantially fund local roads and highways. It puts back generally to the local road program comes back to City Hall. It would be a matter of what are the needs in this case in the city of Thousand Oaks, where the local roads have the greatest need, and that becomes a city council decision. One of the things that happened in state law is that there's been a shift in money that had previously been able to be used for streets and roads. As of July 1 of 2014, Ventura County all of the money that will be going to public transit. It's turned out to be really good for public transit, but it's really harmed local streets and roads. It's a law it's Senate Bill 716, and what 716 does is that it's placing all of a certain color of money called Transportation Development Act money, and placing it into public transit in Ventura County. Because of that, again, public transit is in not as bad a shape as some of our other programs. And you can see the rest of the distribution of the package there on the slide. If we were to combine the constrained program, which was the $4.5 billion I showed you earlier, with the $2.1 billion that I just showed you, we end up with about $6.6 billion in total revenues. And this would be the distribution if we had that local revenue stream. It is a much more balanced program that serves public transit still very substantially, but also goes a long way in taking care of our local road needs as well as our major highway needs. This slide shows the comparison. It's given the distance, it may be tough to make out, but the bottom left slide is the constrained plan based on only state and federal sources, so that we're completely reliant on the state and federal government. The bottom right is how we would propose that if we were to move forward with a half-cent sales tax measure in this county, how we would propose to distribute that revenue stream. And then the middle slide, the middle pie chart shows the sort of the balance once you combine them. Because the measure would have to go to the voters, we have the commission has undertaken some voter research. We don't have results on that yet. We wouldn't be doing our job if we identified a nearly $3 billion gap in funding and a revenue stream that can pay for at least part of that if we didn't come back and ask, well, are the voters even going to be willing to talk about that right now? So we're asking that question of voters in Ventura County. It's admittedly a difficult time to be asking that with the nature of the economy where it is right now. We'll wait to see what the results are from that polling. But no matter what happens with the polling, the nature of this countywide comprehensive transportation planning effort is an exercise that is a long time in coming. It's something that has not been done by this county, and we needed to do it so we had a better idea about where things are. So we'll wait to see what the voter research tells us, and then we'll look forward on how we would approach whether we would pursue a 2012 election cycle or maybe just have to hold off until things improve. But that's still information that we yet to come. The other major effort I'll mention to you, I discussed Senate Bill 716 real briefly. The commission has a countywide regional transit study underway that's looking at some fairly significant, potentially some significant reforms to transit. We may end up exactly where we are now with 7 different fixed route bus systems and all of the different service schedules and all of the different hours of service and frequencies of service, or we may end up with something substantially different. And that is something that VCTC, again, is working on right now. We are supposed to have to the state legislature a report that addresses that question by the end of this year, although it may end up rolling into early next year. Our schedule is such that we've continued this outreach. We've developed the funding strategies and the planning work. Our hope is to have a transportation plan before the Ventura County Transportation Commission sometime in the late winter of 2012. We may have a plan that has a chance of being funded, or we may have a plan that shows a fairly substantial gap in funding, and that we may just have to hold off on how quickly we pursue figuring out how we fix that gap. So that's my presentation. It was a little longer than I'd hoped it would be. I apologize for that, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, this is so much of what we've been doing is about outreach. If you have we sort of hit the mark? Are we off base? Have we addressed the issues that you see in the Conejo Valley adequately? And if not, we want to hear about that so we can. It's been a living document from the get-go. Will continue to be such, but we're open to any input you might be able to share with us. But again, also available for questions.
Thank you very much. That was fascinating. I think we have a question here.
In the interest of full disclosure, I am a community college trustee, so I'm going to ask with a little bit of both hats on. You said you went to the community colleges. Did you go to all three to do this presentation, or do you plan to go to all three?
We have we've been reaching out to all of the community colleges. We've had Cal State Channel Islands, and we've been at Ventura College. We have requests into more. We've had staff and or some students from Moore Park, the president actually of Oxnard College, participate in some of our local advisory groups. So we had done much of our outreach over the course of the summer. So now that we're back into the school year, it's a matter of getting back out to the campuses. The campuses are a major source of transit, particularly transit need. So we're continuing to do that. It's just been a matter of getting the right venue and the right location and getting the outreach done.
Okay, happy to hear that. I mean, just because we are having to do a lot of consolidation due to budget considerations, and trying to move students from one campus to the other is going to become extremely critical to the community college district and the students of the three colleges over the next couple of years. So just if you could put that in your mix.
Interestingly enough, Commissioner, we heard that in our Moore Park local advisory group. We have a representative from facilities from Moore Park College, who shares that they're in the process of building a new parking structure. I only wish they didn't have to do that because they actually had transit service that served a student need a little bit more. Admittedly, she said, I don't know that Moore Park College students are going to go jump on transit, but she said that we have an opportunity here, and she raised exactly that point, that there's some real concerns about some of the consolidations, and getting students between campuses is a real issue. It is,
and it's a very real issue. So just if you could put that in your thinking, that would be great. Thank you.
Commissioner Lemo?
I appreciate your presentation. I have a comment that's a little bit different. I probably, if you were to add up all of the transportation hours in the room per day or per week, I probably traveled double as much as they did. I did 300 miles before I got here today. I have to be honest and say that I cannot envision anybody who works for a living wanting to up their taxes if you have carefully reviewed what we see in transit in Ventura County, because compared to every place I travel from Santa Barbara County down to San Diego County, ours is embarrassing. I have yet to see one bus that has more than a third of it filled, and I've been watching them closely, very closely for a couple of years, extremely closely the last week. No one's riding the buses, and when I ask people why they're not riding the buses, it's because they don't go anywhere, or they don't go anywhere in a timely fashion. Someone told me it takes an hour and 15 minutes to get from Dos Vientos to the mall. That's about 5.5 miles. One of my friends lives up there and says he can walk to the mall faster than he can take the bus. And I congratulate him that at least he's been walking to the mall. On a little bit bigger scale, I cannot get from Ventura County, Camarillo, or really anywhere in Thousand Oaks, to northern San Diego County using a combination of bus and train in less than 5 hours. Even in the worst traffic jam, it's better by car. So I think what we should probably be looking at, if we're really serious about successfully raising enough money to do the job right, is to find out what the job is first. Because I think adding to or improving what we have now is really kind of good money after bad. I think we need to have a comprehensive look at transportation and say, what are we trying to accomplish? What are the pods we want to move people from? And then this is what it's going to cost. Because I don't think we do a good job of it right now at all.
Commissioner, I think VCTC has recognized that, and that's why we've got this transit study that is trying to look at how do we transform transit. It is and when I say transform transit, how do we deal with that question of having buses that are that are going around that are 1/3 full and take a substantial amount of time to get from from origin to destination, whereas in other parts of our county we have literally, again, we're leaving people at bus stops because our buses are so full whereas and in a different jurisdiction we're running empty buses. One of the key principles of the study that we're doing countywide is to focus on the rider and get away from jurisdictional boundaries. There's a long history about how transit has been funded in Ventura County, and it is and that has created in a lot of ways the nature of the systems that we have now that have the lack of connection, the lack of frequency. They're all handled very, very locally, and we need to have a local system, but we can look at a local system and a regional system that a user can learn to navigate relatively quickly. Your point is a very, very good one. That is, to his credit, Thousand Oaks Council member Dennis Gillette has been a strong advocate for figuring out a better way to deliver transit services in Ventura County at the Commission.
Thank you.
Commissioner Engler, did you have anything? Okay. All right. Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Item 6B, crossing guard assignment at Orchard Road, Teresa Drive, and Calle Almendro, Calle Damasco. I cannot talk tonight. I'm tripping over my words. We can wait one moment then.
Good evening. This is John Hallowell. I'm the Traffic Engineering Division Manager, and I'm going to give the crossing guard report this evening. Mike Hauser couldn't make it tonight, so we're going to proceed with this report. And essentially, this is a supplemental report. There was an earlier crossing guard report a few months ago that added in and took away crossing guard assignments at various locations. And this particular report is going to add 2 additional crossing guards. And just for a little bit of background, back in 1970s, the city began their crossing guard program. Currently, we have 25 locations serving 19 elementary and middle schools. There are 33 part-time crossing guards, and most are quite experienced, and we have an annual budget of $260,000. Looks like there's a misprint there. This exhibit just shows the distribution of the crossing guards across the city. And the City Council adopted guidelines so that we can evaluate locations that need crossing guards, and so that they meet certain criteria. And the state of California also has criteria, and the city decided back then that they would have criteria that was less stringent than the state criteria. For instance, on this particular chart, the number of vehicles at an intersection has to be 350, whereas the city has adopted 300. And in that same case, the number of pedestrians in a conflicting position in the intersection is 40 for the state, but the city uses 20. So it is more likely to get a crossing guard in the city of Thousand Oaks than it is someplace where someone uses state guidelines. So the 2 locations we have for adding a crossing guard, one is for at Ladera Elementary. That's at Calle Damasco and Calle Almendro. There currently is a crossing guard assigned at Arbalez, Avenida de los Arbalez, and Las Plantas, that crossing guard will remain. An additional crossing guard will be added at the intersection I just mentioned. Additionally, a crossing guard will be added for Sequoia Middle School on Borchard Road at Teresa. And it was just about a month ago that we decided that we were going to assign these crossing guards, and they were going to start working these intersections before it went for City Council approval, based on the emergency nature to have a crossing guard here at these locations for the start of school. And with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions. This will be going on to the City Council if Traffic Commission approves this in about the middle of November for the final approval.
I have a quick question. Is the cost of the 2 additional crossing guards, is that already in the budget, or will City Council have to add more money to the fund, so to speak?
Yes, it's my understanding that the additional expenditures for the 2 crossing guards is already in the budget. Earlier, when we deleted a couple positions and then we added some, there's still left some rooms for that funding, so I think we're already covered.
Commissioner?
I guess I'm not surprised about the one for Ladera Elementary School. We knew they were going to cross at Plantis, and they were going to have to cross because of the closure of Park Oaks. They were going to have to cross Arbalest, and then they're obviously going to have to cross Almendro. So I'm not surprised about that, given how many walkers go to that school now. I'm curious about Borchard and Teresa. We put in, that's a controlled intersection, and we did the split signal control there a couple of years ago to aid in the crossing there. So is it still just not working with even though we did that split signaling there?
No, the traffic signal is still working as we originally had it adjusted. It's just that there's so many students now crossing.
Well, I meant not working from a safety standpoint. I recognize the signals are probably working. It's just considered unsafe still with the students crossing. Can they not get across in the time necessary, or? I'm just curious why with their middle school students and it's a controlled intersection, what is the safety issue?
Looking at the chart for signalized intersections, those figures are 300 vehicles conflicting with 20 pedestrians was far exceeded for that location. So it was decided it was best to assign a crossing guard there.
And I'm not opposed to it. I was just curious. I thought that when we split it, we were hoping they could get across the street.
Mr. Mashiko has some additional information about how that signal location operates.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, one of the issues at that location is because it's a split-phase intersection. The Teresa leg operates eastbound, or it's northbound first, southbound second. What's happening is some of the pedestrians are crossing when it's not their turn. So when, for example, it's a southbound vehicle movement, normally that's when the southbound pedestrian phase works. But what's happening is the pedestrians that are on the other side of the street, they'll use the other leg and cross when it's not their turn against a don't walk signal.
Shocking. Middle school students do that.
Commissioner Lemo?
Thank you. Well, first I have a process question. Are we actually recommending to add the crossing guards, or are we recommending that council ratify the safety decision made by staff? Because I'm kind of thinking and hoping that council's in a position they wouldn't go backwards and take what has become a safe situation and make it unsafe again. So I'm just asking a little bit about what the process is, because we already have the crossing guards in place at the beginning of the school year, which I think was a very smart decision. How do we go about making the recommendation it's actually a recommendation to continue, not to add. And so I just want to make sure that whatever you think is the proper verbiage, that we do that the right way. Secondly, I do support, I think it's a very good idea. I think the gap, particularly at Borchard, a very, very wide street. Middle school children do not pay attention whatsoever, and we don't have an officer here tonight, but I see a lot of people, doing 60, 65 on Borchard all the time. And so I think just the presence of a crossing guard is a very good move. I just want to make sure that our process is proper. And if this is the right wording, I would move the recommendation.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we're recommending that the commission recommend to the city council that the 2 crossing guard locations be added to the program, recognizing that they've been in operation for approximately 30 days.
Thank you. I still move the recommendation.
Are there any comments?
I spent a good part of the day today over at Ladera Elementary School, and I really did see a lot of the traffic problems. We were there to observe how people are using their vehicles, accessing the school, and also the interaction between vehicles and pedestrians. And the pedestrians that I really worry about are the kids that are being encouraged to cross the street by parents who think it's safe. So we're embracing that, trying to look at some real practical solutions. But I will say that the crossing guards in that area helping the walkers from south of Avenue de los Arboles coming up to Ladera, they are outstanding, and they're really making a difference so that cars slow down and then have to stop when they aren't really thinking about the kids that are right there.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? We do have a motion. Okay, I guess we can take a vote. I'm pretty sure we can do a hand vote for this.
Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. All right. Item number 6C. We do have a speaker card, so we'll go through the report, and then finally, you guys get your turn. Mr. Mashiko?
Yes, thank you, Chair McMahon. This item is for stop sign installations at 10 T intersections. Tonight, we're asking the Traffic Commission to recommend that the City Council adopt a resolution to install stop signs at 10 T intersections. I'll point out the locations on maps that will follow. And if the Commission concurs with the recommendation to install these stop signs, we'll submit a report to City Council in mid-November, most likely the November 15th meeting for consideration. Okay, here's a first of 2 location maps that show 6 of the 10 stop sign locations. These are all T intersections, and we're adding the stop signs just to the terminating streets that tie into the through street. You'll notice that this is in the neighborhood bounded by Moore Park Road to the west and Gainsborough Road to the north. Along Sheffield, there's 5 intersections. They're crossed by Bedford, Thoreau, Dryden, Lear, and Galsworthy Street. The 6th intersection on this map is also Galsworthy Street on the opposite end, where it ties into Gainsborough Road. Here's the second location map that shows the remaining 4 T intersections that we're proposing stop signs again on the terminating streets. These are all surrounding Acacia Elementary School, and these were brought to our attention by the school safety team after one of their meetings. 2 of the intersections are along Dover Avenue. You have eastbound Thames Street and westbound Norman Avenue. 2 of the other intersections are along Suffolk Avenue. You have eastbound Stratford and southbound Suffolk, where it ties into Norman Avenue. Basically, what we're doing with stop sign installations like this, we're now bringing them to the Traffic Commission as part of our public outreach. We've previously taken these items directly to City Council for their consideration, And in some cases, at the council meetings, some of the residents have brought concerns. So now our new procedure is to bring these to traffic commission so that if there's any issues, we can try to iron them out here before they move on to city council. When we did our public outreach, we notified about a 500-foot notification zone surrounding each of the stop signs. So we sent out about 600 notices, so that's quite a bit of notification. Again, each of these T intersections have no stop signs on any of the approaches. And typically, as you've driven around town, you'll find that most of the T intersections in town, the terminating leg is the one that has the stop sign. The through street is uncontrolled. And typically when stop signs are installed, they usually go in when tracks are built. These are older neighborhoods, and obviously these stop signs did not go in when the tracks were built. They aren't mandatory to have these stop signs, since the vehicle code requires that the terminating street shall yield the right-of-way to through traffic. But in each of these cases, we did a field visit, made observations of the traffic flow, and due to sight distance reasons, whether it's road curvature or corner landscaping or a combination of both, we found that it's a good idea to have stop sign control at these terminating legs. So here's an example of we have corner landscaping and vertical curvature issues. This is at the intersection of Thoreau Circle at Sheffield Place. You notice that if you were a vehicle coming out of Thoreau Circle, you have a heavy amount of corner landscaping on private property. You could tell that some of the landscaping used to encroach out into the sidewalk area. It requires regular maintenance. Also, the road here, as you drive south on Sheffield, there's a vertical rise in the road, and also it's difficult to see in this picture, but if you're out there, the road will bend inward. Here's an example of what a driver would see at the intersection of westbound Norman Avenue at Dover Street. You have corner landscaping on private property, and you can tell how much it's growing out over the sidewalk area. Another example of corner landscaping here, it's at eastbound Thames Street at Dover Avenue. Nice full rose bush that also is growing out and impairing sight distance. I do want to point out that these stop signs we're proposing are not the type that we've looked at in the past, where when we talk about multi-way stop sign control. Multi-way stop sign control intersections where each of the legs into the intersection would be regulated with a stop sign. In general, these 10 intersections that we're looking at tonight are more or less light volume, and there really is no need to stop all 3 legs to the intersection. We talked about these warrants that we follow. There are traffic volume thresholds that must be met before an intersection would qualify for multi-way stop sign control. Typically, you need 500 vehicles in an hour. 200 of the 500 vehicles must come from the minor leg, and you must meet the 200-500 combination for 8 hours of the day, and clearly these are not those types of, or that type of intersection. So in summary, our goal here is to bring these 10 T intersections in compliance with the current standards and practices to control the movement of the terminating street due to sight distance reasons. We want to regulate or better regulate right-of-way control at each of these locations. And in each of the cases, we're not trying to control speed. Just the terminating leg, again, would be stop sign controlled, and the through street would be unaffected. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Commissioner?
I'm just curious, if we look at the second picture, attachment number 2, around Acacia, there's a couple other T intersections like Norwick and Norman and Kirk. well, Kirk, I guess, would be multi-way, but Norwick and Norman is another T intersection. Does that already have a stop sign, or was it just not considered because there was not the sight distance? I'm just curious if there's one already there, or if we just didn't look at it. And another one is over at Thames and Hendricks. It looks like, again, it's a T intersection, and just wondered, I know these are were a school safety team recommendation right around Acacia, but it would seem Norwick is also a T intersection pretty close to Acacia. So is there one already there?
Yes, I believe during our field investigation, we did find those two intersections you identified do have stop signs on the terminating streets.
Okay, thank you. And I'm pretty sure the ones on Sheffield, that way back 100 years ago when I got my driver's license in Thousand Oaks, the DMV used to be kind of behind Jack in the Box in that area, and these were all the blind intersections we had to know about. So for the auto fail, so that's why those were there.
Commissioner?
So as I look at the stop sign placement, and you're concerned for right or sight purposes, you're asking basically that drivers stop, look, and then turn, but their visibility isn't improved that much, except by fact that they're stopped long enough to work harder at looking at it. But they're still going to creep out and look around if those bushes are still where they are and their visibility is limited.
Yes, and basically what we're trying to do is ensure that the vehicles coming up to the intersection do come to a complete stop before proceeding, versus the way it is today. They'll approach the intersection and may not even stop. They'll just roll through, and if they're outside the neighborhood, they're not aware that the through street, they might think that's the leg that would have to stop. So what we're doing is making sure that the terminating leg stops. For example, you might have, where there's corner vegetation, a pedestrian that might be looking across the street, and the approaching vehicle does not see them, but because the stop sign is there, we'll ensure that that vehicle will stop and allow the pedestrian who's getting ready to enter the intersection a safe crossing opportunity.
Excuse me.
Thank you. Do you anticipate actually putting people out there to enforce this?
Well, what we would probably do is work the enforcement with the police department more or less on a complaint basis. These are low volume intersections, so their time out there may not be well spent, but if they are asked to go out there, they will.
I had a question for the other map. I actually did my homework and I went to all these locations, and I was on Galsworthy going to Sheffield, and if you sit there where you propose the stop sign, if you go to your left, it's dead end, and on the side of the street that you're coming from, there's no houses, and then across the street I think there's only 2, maybe 3. So I'm wondering if that particular location needs a stop sign, because there's nobody that's going to be coming from the left except for maybe those 2 or 3 houses. And the person on Galsworthy will most likely not be turning left, thereby going in front of any cars coming from the right. So I'm just curious if I missed something and if there was some other reason why you wanted a stop sign there.
Yeah, that's true. That if you're approaching Galsworthy or approaching Sheffield from Galsworthy to the left, the road Sheffield terminates. So there's really not a whole lot of traffic. However, there is still that issue of visibility, because on that corner there's a large bush on that corner, and if there was a vehicle that was coming, I mean, I guess it would just, all you need is one vehicle. There is a chance for a conflict there. It's a remote chance, but there's still an issue.
It just seems like, why would a vehicle be coming from there? That's all. it's not a make or break for me. It just seems maybe unnecessary. And I don't know how much stop signs cost. Probably very minimal, but I don't know. I'll just point that out. Commissioner?
I have a specific question in regards to that. You'll recall a couple of years ago, some of us went out to a sort of a stop sign, or to a traffic seminar where one of the subjects were stop signs. Can't use them to control speed, but you do use them to establish right of way. And my question is this: what level of liability does the city have if an accident happens there and we didn't have a stop sign? Is it any greater, any less? Makes no difference.
I think we would have, well, we're not attorneys, but based on what we hear, is that we would have increased liability if we know we were out there looking at all these intersections because of a complaint. And so it's documented that there was a complaint. So we've evaluated all those intersections. And if it does not meet a sight distance requirement, even though it's minimal, the amount of traffic, there still is a possibility of a conflict and a collision. So we would have increased liability if we did fail to act. And so we're just assigning the right-of-way here because conditions have changed with the additive retaining wall on one side of the street and the growth of the hedges on the other. They're different than they were when this subdivision was originally approved. So,
thank you. You answered my question.
Okay. Was there in particular a complaint at that location, that specific location?
I'm not sure exactly where the complaint came from. I may have started with the Galsworthy at Gainsborough location. And what we normally do is when there's a complaint that's for sight distance, we'll go and sort of look at the adjacent intersection, since if we're going to be looking to put one in, we might as well look at the adjacent intersections and cover those as well.
I see. Okay. At this time, if our questions of staff are finished for now, we can come back. We have a speaker card, and thank you for your patience. Julia Parnell, when you get to the podium, please state your name and city of residence for the record.
My name is Julia Parnell. I live at 166 Lear Circle on that first map, and I'm the one who originally called and spoke with Ray Alonzo about the problem with cars that don't know that at a T intersection you're supposed to come to a complete stop. 100 years ago when we were in driver's training, they taught us that, and I think they don't go over that anymore. I come off of Lear Circle every morning and drive this route to work, and I drive down there at 20 miles an hour with my thumb on the horn because I know that inevitably somebody's going to come off one of these streets, more likely Dryden or Thoreau, because they're on a downhill. And they don't stop because Sheffield's not as busy as, say, Moore Park Road. They don't stop. And I have had near misses in the past 11 years that have just scared me so badly I had to sit there for 5 minutes before I could go on. Probably Galsworthy is the least problematic of these. There are just a couple houses to the left as you're coming down Galsworthy to Sheffield. But what we also have down there are quite a few people walking their dogs and people like us who walk through that little hole in the wall down to Whole Foods. So you do have some pedestrians there. And there are kids in this neighborhood who go to Glenwood Glenwood Elementary School, Redwood Middle School, and Thousand Oaks High School, who are walking or on bikes. I ride my bike occasionally to work at Cal Lutheran, and this just scares me to death. And I think that with the cost of at least 4 stop signs, if we can get them, we can really save, somebody from being in a horrendous accident. People do speed on Sheffield, which they shouldn't do. But, I hear the squeal of brakes a lot. Nighttime is worse because there are no street lights, but I think stop signs are really going to help this. That's it.
Thank you very much. And I want to say that you answered my question about why we need a stop sign at Galsworthy and Sheffield, because you knew the staff didn't live there. They didn't know about the pedestrians and people coming through to Whole Foods and the kids riding their bikes. So the fact that you came down here was really important, really important. But since you're not at the microphone, it's like you're done. Okay. It has to all go into the record. So thank you very much. At that, do we have any more questions? Or do you have any comments?
I have one more comment.
One more comment?
The only thing I would ask is, in my neighborhood, a T intersection stop sign went out without any flags or changes, and I know these are relatively low traffic areas, but still people are in habits and they don't stop. And so all I would ask is, if we are putting new stop signs up, that they at least go up with those flags for 30 days or whatever they do, because I was as surprised as anybody when I didn't notice the stop sign go up at the T intersection in my neighborhood, and I would have been extraordinarily disappointed to get a ticket for it. So if we could just make sure that we give even this low traffic areas the courtesy of that notification, I would appreciate it. I think everybody would.
Okay, we will close community meeting, and I'm looking for a motion.
I'll move staff's recommendation.
I think we could probably have a hand vote again.
Your hand. Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. And thank you again for coming down. Okay, item number 7, status report of prior traffic commission recommendations. I think we can all see that.
I might want to add that the City Council approved your recommendation on October 11th.
Yay! I'm so glad to hear that. Did you have anything else to add about our recommendations? Okay. Okay. Item number 8, commissioner referrals. We have none. Item number 9, work program and commission schedule. All right, that's informational. Item number 11, engineer status reports. Oh, that's right. I skipped 10. So we're looking at not a lot going on for November.
That's correct.
Okay.
We don't have any items to present to you in November. And if you follow the quarter, one meeting per quarter, the October meeting
Does the job.
satisfies that requirement for this quarter.
All right.
Then I move we cancel the November meeting and come back again in January.
Okay. I guess we'll do another hand vote on that.
Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. All right. And then the engineer status reports, item number 11. I think these are informational. Did you have anything to add to it? Don't we usually have... Oh, okay. Comments. I kind of just glossed right over commissioner comments and discussion. Was there anything that you wanted to bring up? Okay. In that case, we will adjourn the next meeting to be held at 7:30 p.m. on January 18th, 2012 in the boardroom of this Civic Arts Plaza on the 3rd floor. Thank you, everybody.